She sat by the tall glass window of her office, staring at the city lights that stretched far into the distance. From up here, everything looked perfect. The streets, the cars, the people rushing home. It was a view most people would dream of. Yet for her, it only reminded her how far away she was from everything real. She was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing companies in the city. Every day was filled with meetings, presentations, and decisions that shaped people's futures. Her employees admired her confidence, her voice that never trembled, and the way she could solve problems in seconds. But behind that calm smile was someone who had forgotten what peace felt like. Her office was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. It was late, but she wasn't in a rush to go home. The truth was, there wasn't really a home waiting for her anymore. The house she lived in was beautiful but empty. No laughter, no warmth, just the quiet ticking of the clock that reminded her how lonely success could feel. Years ago, when she started her company, she had dreams that burned bright. She wanted to build something meaningful, to create jobs, to prove that she could stand strong in a world that often doubted women like her. And she did. But along the way, she lost something, the soft parts of herself, the parts that used to believe in love, in slow mornings, in simple joys. Her marriage had ended quietly, almost like a business deal that both sides knew wasn't working anymore. There was no big fight, no tears, just silence. They had grown apart like two trains running in different directions. Since then, she threw herself into work, convincing herself she didn't need anyone. Love, she thought, was a distraction, but sometimes, in moments like this when the world outside glowed and her heart felt cold, she wondered if she had been wrong. She closed her laptop and stood by the window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. The woman looking back at her looked strong but tired. Her eyes carried stories of sleepless nights and heavy responsibilities. People often told her she was lucky, but they didn't see the loneliness that came with power. One evening, after a long board meeting that left her drained, she decided to do something she hadn't done in years. Take a walk without a purpose. No phone, no driver, no schedule. Just herself in the city. It was drizzling lightly, the kind of soft rain that made the air smell fresh. She walked without an umbrella, letting the raindrops fall on her hair. The streets were quieter than usual. A few people hurried by, holding their jackets close. She passed by restaurants filled with laughter and music, scenes that felt foreign to her. Then, as she turned a corner, she saw a small cafe she'd never noticed before. It was tucked between two old buildings, with a warm glow coming from inside. The sign above the door was simple, hand-painted. Something about it felt peaceful, inviting. She hesitated for a moment, then walked in. The smell of fresh coffee wrapped around her like comfort. Soft music played in the background, and the place was filled with the quiet chatter of a few late customers. She found a small corner table and sat down. For the first time in months, she didn't think about work. She just watched people, the couple sharing a dessert, the old man reading a newspaper, and a father trying to calm his little daughter who looked on the verge of tears. The little girl had dropped her drawing on the floor, and the paper was now wet with spilled juice. She looked heartbroken. But what caught the CEO's attention wasn't the accident. It was the way the father handled it. He didn't scold her or look frustrated. He simply smiled, knelt down, and said softly, "It's okay. We can draw another one. Maybe an even better one." The girl sniffled but nodded. He wiped her hands, helped her sit again, and asked the waiter for a napkin. The scene was small, almost ordinary, but it touched something inside her. The way he spoke, his patience, his warmth. It reminded her of something she had lost a long time ago. She didn't mean to stare, but he noticed. Their eyes met for a brief second and he smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that tried to charm or impress. It was simple, kind, real. She felt something she hadn't in years. A quiet spark, the kind that made her heart feel lighter. The waiter brought her coffee, and she thanked him softly. She tried to look away, to focus on her drink, but her mind kept drifting back to the man and his daughter. There was something about their bond that fascinated her. Maybe it was how genuine it felt. Something rare in the world she lived in. A few minutes later, the father and daughter stood to leave. As they passed her table, the little girl accidentally dropped one of her crayons. The CEO bent quickly to pick it up and handed it back with a smile. "Thank you," the girl said shyly. Her father nodded politely. "She always carries those crayons everywhere. I think she believes colors can fix anything." The woman chuckled lightly. That's a lovely way to see the world. He smiled again. Maybe we all need a bit of that sometimes. That one sentence stayed with her. Maybe we all need a bit of that sometimes. After they left, she sat there for a long time, sipping her coffee slowly. She didn't know who he was, but something about that short exchange felt different. It wasn't like the polite small talk she had at business events. It was human. When she finally stepped out of the cafe, the rain had stopped. The air felt cool and clean, and the streetlights reflected softly on the wet pavement. She walked home feeling something she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was close. Maybe hope. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the cafe, about the man with the calm eyes and his daughter's crayons. It was strange how a 5-minute moment could stir so many emotions. The next morning she sat at her desk, trying to focus on her usual work routine. But the world outside her office window looked different somehow. The same city, the same skyline, but it felt less cold. She wondered if she would ever see them again. Days passed and she went back to her usual schedule, meetings, calls, late nights. Yet somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. She started noticing things she used to overlook. The way the receptionist smiled every morning. The laughter of employees during lunch breaks. The sound of rain against her window. For the first time in years, she felt like life was whispering to her, asking her to slow down. One afternoon, she found herself walking near that same cafe again. She didn't plan it, it just happened. The familiar glow of the place caught her eye, and before she could second-guess herself, she stepped inside. The air smelled the same, warm and comforting. She took the same corner seat and ordered coffee. She didn't expect to see anyone she knew, but a few minutes later her heart skipped a beat. There he was, the same man sitting at a table with his daughter, helping her with another drawing. She almost looked away, unsure if she should say anything. But he noticed her first. Their eyes met again and he smiled just like before. Back again? He asked gently as he passed by her table to get more napkins. She nodded, smiling back. Yes, I think I needed a break from the world. He chuckled softly. Then you've come to the right place. This cafe feels like it's hidden from time. They talked for a few minutes, nothing deep, just simple conversation about coffee, the weather, and the beauty of small moments. But those few minutes felt real. She hadn't realized how much she missed talking to someone without thinking about business, money, or power. When he went back to his seat, she looked around the cafe and realized something. Maybe happiness didn't always come from achieving more. Maybe it came from moments like this, quiet, unplanned, honest. As she left that evening, she didn't know where this small connection would lead. But she knew one thing. For the first time in a long while, her heart didn't feel as heavy. She had spent years building an empire, chasing perfection, and hiding her pain behind success. But all it took was one ordinary evening, one simple smile from a stranger, to remind her that she was still human, and that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. The morning sun spilled through her office window, warm and golden. She was sitting behind her desk, flipping through reports, but her mind was somewhere else. Every now and then, her thoughts drifted back to that small cafe. She could still see the little girl's bright smile and her father's gentle eyes. It had been a few days, but the memory still lingered like a quiet song she couldn't forget. Her assistant came in with a stack of papers and asked if she wanted her usual black coffee. For the first time she hesitated. No, she said softly. Make it a cappuccino instead. It was a small change, but even that surprised her. She didn't know why she said it. Maybe because cappuccino reminded her of that cafe, of the warmth she felt sitting there among strangers who didn't expect anything from her. The next few days were heavy with work. The company was preparing for a new launch and she was buried under deadlines. Yet in the middle of all the stress, she caught herself smiling once in a while for no reason. The image of that father and daughter somehow stayed with her. She couldn't explain why, but it made her feel calmer, almost grounded. One Friday evening, when the week finally came to an end, she found herself walking out of the office earlier than usual. Her driver was waiting, but she told him she'd walk instead. She wanted to breathe, to escape the noise of her own thoughts. The city was alive with weekend energy, streetlights glowing, music floating out of restaurants, and people laughing as they passed by. Without realizing it, her feet carried her back to that same little cafe. It was almost empty this time. except for a few people quietly reading or typing on their laptops. She walked in, ordered her drink, and sat at her favorite corner table. As she stirred her coffee absent-mindedly, she heard a soft voice nearby, a child's laughter. She looked up and her heart skipped a beat. It was them, the man and his daughter. The little girl was sitting on a stool near the counter, coloring something on a napkin while her father waited for their drinks. He noticed her just as she looked up. For a moment their eyes met and he smiled in quiet surprise. He walked over carrying 2 cups in his hands. "Well," he said with an easy tone, "I think we might be following each other now." She laughed softly. "Or maybe we just both have good taste in coffee." He smiled, nodding. "That's a good explanation." He introduced his daughter, who waved shyly. "She insists this place has the best muffins in the world," he said. The girl giggled, holding up her napkin drawing. "Look, I made another rainbow." She leaned closer to see it. The drawing was full of colors, uneven lines, and innocent joy. "That's beautiful," she said warmly. The little girl's eyes sparkled. "Daddy says rainbows mean hope." Her chest tightened slightly at those words. Hope. It was such a simple word, but one she hadn't truly felt in years. The man smiled, ruffling his daughter's hair. "She remembers everything I say, even when I don't mean to be wise," she chuckled softly. "Maybe that's the best kind of wisdom." They talked for a few minutes about books, coffee, and the weather. She learned that he was a freelance designer who worked mostly from home, so he could spend time with his daughter. It surprised her how calm and genuine he seemed. There was no sense of rush or need to impress, no hidden agenda in his words. He just was. When his daughter ran off to look at the pastry display, the two of them talked more. He asked her what she did, and for a moment, she considered giving the usual polished answer. But something about his openness made her speak honestly. "I run a company," she said. "It takes most of my time. Sometimes, it feels like it's taken all of me." He looked at her quietly for a moment. "Sounds like a lot of weight to carry alone." She gave a small smile. "It is, but I guess you learn to live with it." He nodded, his gaze kind but steady. "Or maybe you forget what it's like to live without it." Those words hit deeper than she expected. It felt like he saw through the surface, the part of her that pretended to be fine. Before leaving, he told her it was good to see her again, and she said the same. The little girl waved goodbye, clutching her new drawing in her hand. When they walked out, she sat there quietly for a long while, feeling something shift inside her. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight fell gently across her room. She made coffee at home and smiled when she realized she was humming. The day felt lighter somehow. It wasn't that her problems had disappeared. They hadn't. But there was something about that man's quiet presence that stayed with her. It was strange, yet comforting. Over the next few weeks, they ran into each other a few more times, sometimes by coincidence, sometimes because one of them secretly hoped for it. Their conversations grew longer, warmer, more natural. They talked about life, about how unpredictable it could be. She told him about the loneliness that came with being at the top. He shared stories of his late wife, about how he learned to raise a child alone. There was no pity in his voice, no bitterness, just gratitude for the small moments that kept him going. The way he spoke about love, loss, and strength made her see life differently. One rainy afternoon, they met again at the cafe. The little girl was coloring quietly while they talked. The rain outside tapped softly against the windows. He looked at her and said, "You know, I used to think people needed to do big things to find meaning. But now I think maybe it's the small things that keep us alive." She stared at him for a moment. "Like what?" he smiled. "Like a cup of coffee shared with someone who understands silence." That made her laugh quietly. She hadn't realized how much she needed that kind of peace. As days went by, their friendship became something she looked forward to. They didn't meet every day, but when they did, it felt easy. He never asked about her company, her status, or her past. To him, she was just another person, a woman sitting across the table sipping coffee and talking about life. And she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone else. She told him about her fears, the fear of failure, the emptiness behind her success, the exhaustion that came from always being strong. He listened without judgment, sometimes offering quiet advice, sometimes just letting her speak. Once, when she mentioned how she often worked late and forgot to eat, he said softly, You spend your life taking care of everyone else's needs. Who takes care of yours? The question lingered long after she went home that night. Slowly, their connection started to heal parts of her she didn't even know were broken. She began to laugh more, to notice small things again: the smell of rain, the taste of her morning coffee, the comfort of slow conversations. Her employees began noticing too. She seemed lighter, kinder, more approachable. Even her assistant joked one day, "You're smiling more lately. Should we be worried?" She laughed it off, but inside, she knew something beautiful was happening. She wasn't falling in love in a rush. It wasn't that kind of story. It was quieter, slower, deeper. It was two people learning to understand each other's scars without trying to fix them. There were still hard days, board meetings that went wrong, sleepless nights filled with numbers and plans. But now, in the middle of those storms, she found herself thinking about that small cafe, about the father who always seemed to find hope in simple things, and every time she thought of him, she felt calmer. One evening, after another long day, she walked by the cafe again. It was closing soon, but the lights were still on. She peeked through the window and saw him wiping tables while his daughter stacked napkins into small piles, humming to herself. For a moment, she just stood there, watching them, smiling softly. There was something so peaceful about the scene, ordinary yet full of meaning. She turned to leave, but the little girl saw her through the glass and waved excitedly. He looked up and smiled, motioning her to come in. "Working late again?" He teased gently as she entered. She laughed. "Seems like we both are." He poured her a cup of coffee without asking what she wanted. "You look like you could use this." She took it, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "How do you always know what I need?" He smiled quietly. "Maybe because I stopped looking at what people show and started seeing what they hide." Her heart ached in a way that felt good. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. That night, as she walked home, the rain began again, soft and cool. But this time, she didn't rush. She let it fall, smiling up at the sky. Because somewhere between her empty office and that little cafe, she had begun to find something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. The days started to move differently for her. Work was still the same, but something inside her had changed. Mornings didn't feel as heavy anymore, and nights didn't feel as lonely. Her calendar was still full, her responsibilities still endless, but she no longer felt like she was running on empty. Somewhere between those quiet cafe visits and small talks, she had begun to breathe again. She didn't tell anyone about him. It wasn't because she was hiding something, it was because it felt too special, too personal. It wasn't like the relationship she'd had before, where everything was rushed and complicated. This was slower, calmer, built on small moments that felt real. Sometimes they met at the cafe after her long meetings. Sometimes she joined him and his daughter at the park on weekends, sitting on a bench while the little girl played on the swings. The laughter of that child filled spaces in her heart she didn't even know were empty. One afternoon, while the little girl was busy chasing pigeons, he handed her a cup of coffee and said, "You look tired again." She smiled faintly. "I'm always tired." He studied her face for a second. "No, this is different. You look like someone carrying something heavy again." She sighed. "It's just work." "It's always work. The board is restless. The investors want results faster than possible. Some days I feel like I'm holding everything together with my bare hands." He nodded, quiet for a moment. "And who's holding you?" His words hit deeper than she expected. She didn't answer, but he didn't push her to. That was one thing she liked about him. He never tried to fix her. He just understood. They sat in silence for a while, watching the little girl laugh in the distance. Then he said softly, "You know, when I lost my wife, I thought my world had ended. But one night I looked at my daughter sleeping, and I realized I still had a reason to wake up. Maybe that's all life is sometimes. Finding one reason to keep going even when you feel like stopping." She looked at him, her chest tightening. "You make it sound simple." He smiled a little. "Maybe it is. Maybe we just make it complicated." After that day, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. They echoed in her mind every time she felt overwhelmed. And when things at work started to get even more stressful, she found herself walking to the cafe more often. Sometimes just to sit for 10 minutes, even if he wasn't there. One evening, she walked in and saw him sitting by himself. His daughter was with a babysitter that night. When he saw her, he smiled, and she joined him without saying a word. They didn't need to talk much anymore. Their silence felt comfortable. He looked at her for a moment and said, "You know, you don't always have to be strong." She laughed softly. "I don't know how not to be." "Then maybe it's time to learn." She stared at her cup, unsure how to respond. All her life, being strong was what had kept her going. But for the first time, she wondered if that same strength was also what had kept her from feeling alive. He told her about his daughter's latest obsession, painting rainbows and giving them to strangers in the park. "She says everyone needs a bit of color in their day," he said, chuckling. "I think she's right." "She's wise for her age," the woman said. "She's been through a lot. But she reminds me that healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like laughter in the middle of sadness." That line stayed with her for days. Healing doesn't always look dramatic. Maybe that's what she had been missing all along. She kept waiting for some grand moment to make her feel whole again. But maybe healing was already happening quietly in small moments, like a shared cup of coffee or a kind smile. Over the next few weeks, their friendship grew deeper. They started sharing more about their lives, not the surface-level things, but the real stuff. She told him about her fears of being replaced at work, about how she sometimes felt undeserving of happiness. He told her about the nights he used to stay awake wondering if he was enough for his daughter. They both carried their own versions of loneliness. Yet when they were together, that loneliness didn't feel so heavy. One Sunday, he invited her to a small local art fair where his daughter's school was displaying student drawings. She hesitated at first, unsure if she belonged in that kind of setting. But when she saw the excitement in his daughter's eyes, she couldn't say no. The fair was held in a park. The air smelled of popcorn and freshly cut grass. Kids ran around laughing, holding balloons while parents chatted nearby. It was simple, ordinary, but it felt like magic to her. She hadn't been around something this genuine in years. The little girl tugged at her hand, pulling her toward a row of drawings pinned to a board. "Look, this one's mine," she said proudly. It was another rainbow, bright and colorful, with a line at the bottom that read, "There's always light after rain." The CEO smiled, kneeling to look closer. "That's beautiful," she said softly. "And true." The man stood a few steps away, watching them with quiet affection. When their eyes met, she saw something there, a warmth that scared her a little. It wasn't just friendship anymore. She could feel it growing into something deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Later that day, as they walked together, she said, "You and your daughter, you remind me that the world can still be kind." He smiled gently. "It's kind when you let it be." That night, when she got home, she sat on her bed and stared out the window. The city lights twinkled below, the same as always, but for the first time, she didn't feel like they belonged to someone else's world. She belonged to it too. Days turned into weeks, and their connection became part of her life. It wasn't loud or rushed, it was steady. Every time she saw him, it felt like time slowed down. They would sit for hours, talking about everything from childhood memories to the meaning of happiness. He never made her feel like she had to be perfect. One evening, he said something that she would never forget. "You know what I like about you?" She raised an eyebrow playfully. "What?" "You listen," he said. "Most people don't, they just wait for their turn to talk." "But you really listen," she smiled. "That's ironic." "Most people say I talk too much in meetings," he laughed. "Maybe that's because you've spent too long talking to people who don't listen." That simple truth made her heart ache a little. They didn't talk about what they were or what it meant. There was no label to what was happening between them. It was just two broken souls finding comfort in each other's presence. But slowly, she began to notice how much he had become a part of her life. When something good happened at work, he was the first person she wanted to tell. When she felt exhausted, she thought about his words. When she passed by the cafe, she couldn't help but smile. One night, she found herself standing outside his house, holding a small bag of muffins she had picked up on the way. She didn't even know why she went there. She just wanted to see him. He opened the door, surprised but happy. "You didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to," she said. "You're always giving. I thought it was my turn." He stepped aside and let her in. The house was small but warm, filled with little touches of family, drawings on the fridge, books on the table, a half-finished puzzle on the floor. It felt alive in a way her house never did. As they sat on the couch, he handed her a cup of tea. She looked around and said softly, "You have a beautiful home." He smiled. "It's not much, but it's enough for us," she nodded. "Sometimes I think I've spent my whole life chasing more success, more money, more control. But maybe enough is what I was really looking for." He looked at her quietly, then said, "Enough isn't about what you have. It's about who you share it with." Something in her heart broke and healed at the same time. She didn't know what this connection would become, but she knew it mattered. It was teaching her something she had forgotten long ago, that love doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in small, gentle moments that remind you you're not alone. As she left that night, she turned back to see him standing by the doorway, waving with that same kind smile. The cool night air brushed against her face, and she smiled to herself. For years, she had been building walls so high that no one could reach her. But now, for the first time, someone had climbed over them, not with force but with patience, laughter, and understanding, and she knew one thing for certain. Her heart was slowly finding its way back to life. The next few weeks felt like a quiet shift in her life. She still woke up early, went to meetings, and dealt with deadlines, but something about her world had softened. The weight she once carried on her shoulders didn't feel as unbearable anymore. It was as if his presence, even when he wasn't around, reminded her to breathe. But deep inside, she was afraid. Afraid of what she was feeling. Afraid of how much she was starting to care. She had built her life on control, on order, on plans that never included someone like him. Yet now her days felt incomplete without hearing his voice or seeing his smile. One Friday evening, after another long meeting, she decided to stop by the cafe where they had first met. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt safe. The barista smiled at her as she ordered her usual drink. She sat at their table by the window, looking at the empty chair across from her, wondering if he'd walk in. A few minutes later, the door opened and there he was, holding a small paper bag, looking slightly tired but still wearing that gentle smile that made everything else fade. "You came?" he said, walking toward her. "I needed coffee," she said softly, though they both knew that wasn't the reason. He sat down and placed the paper bag on the table. "I brought something for you." Inside were 2 homemade cookies, slightly misshapen but still warm. "My daughter insisted we make these for you," he said with a grin. "She said you looked like someone who needed more sweetness in your life." She laughed, shaking her head. "She's too kind, and probably right." They talked for a while about small things, his daughter's school play, her upcoming presentation, the changing weather. But there was something different in the air that night. They both felt it, though neither of them said a word about it. After a pause, he looked at her carefully and said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he hesitated. "Why do you always look like you're holding something back?" She blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you laugh, you listen, but sometimes it feels like part of you is still somewhere else, like you're scared to let yourself be here fully." His words hit deep. She didn't speak for a few seconds. Finally, she said quietly, "Because every time I let someone in, they leave, or I lose them. So it's easier to keep a little distance. That way it doesn't hurt as much." He nodded slowly. "I get that. I used to do the same thing. After my wife passed, I shut everyone out. I told myself it was better to stay numb than risk feeling pain again. But then my daughter started drawing rainbows everywhere. I asked her why, and she said, 'Because the rain has to stop sometime, Dad.'" She smiled faintly. "She sounds like she's been sent to remind people how to live." "She's been sent to remind me, that's for sure," he said softly. Then looking at her, he added, "Maybe she's reminding you too." The cafe lights reflected in her eyes, and for a moment she didn't feel like the CEO everyone depended on. She just felt human, fragile, hopeful, seen. When they left the cafe that night, he walked her to her car. The air was cool and the street was quiet. As they stood by her car, she looked at him and said, "Thank you for not treating me like I'm made of glass." He smiled gently. "That's because you're not. You're made of strength. You just forget it sometimes." That night, as she drove home, she couldn't stop thinking about his words. She realized that maybe the reason she felt so drawn to him wasn't just because he was kind or patient. It was because he made her feel safe enough to be herself. Days turned into weeks, and their connection grew deeper. He started picking her up sometimes after work, and she began joining him and his daughter for dinner on weekends. It wasn't about luxury or grand moments. It was about laughter around a small table, a child's stories about her day, the sound of home-cooked meals being served. It felt real. It felt right. One evening, while they were cleaning up after dinner, his daughter came running into the kitchen holding a drawing. "Look," she said proudly. "It's you and Daddy and me." The CEO looked at the paper, her heart swelling. The little girl had drawn 3 stick figures holding hands under a big sun. Her voice caught as she asked softly, "That's me?" The child nodded. "Yes. You smile now in my picture." The man glanced at her quietly. Their eyes met, and there was something unspoken between them, a tenderness that went beyond words. Later that night, after the girl had gone to bed, they sat outside on the porch. The stars were faint and a soft breeze moved through the air. He looked at her and said, "She's grown so attached to you. You've become a part of her little world." She smiled softly. "She's become part of mine too." There was a silence after that, one filled with feelings neither of them could hide anymore. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but I haven't felt this alive in years." He turned to her, his expression gentle. "You don't have to know what it is right now. Just let it be what it's meant to be." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart beating faster. Then she said quietly, "You're making me believe again. In love, in people, in life." He smiled, not saying anything, just reaching out to hold her hand. The touch was simple but full of meaning. For the next few weeks, things between them felt even more natural. She began to laugh more at work. Her team noticed the change, though no one knew why. She started encouraging her employees to take breaks, to breathe, to find balance. She realized that leadership wasn't about pushing harder, it was about caring more. One of her closest colleagues even said, "You seem lighter these days, happier." She smiled. "Maybe I just remembered that life isn't supposed to be all pressure." But not everything was perfect. The board started pressuring her again to make a major decision about a company merger. It was risky, and it could change everything. The stress began to creep back into her life. One evening, after a particularly hard day, she went to see him. He opened the door and saw her standing there, eyes tired, voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," she said. "I'm so tired of fighting for everything." Without a word, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. It wasn't romantic, it was comforting, grounding. He whispered, "You don't have to fight alone anymore." She stayed there for a long time, just breathing in that moment. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to lean on someone. That night, they sat on the couch talking for hours. She told him everything, her fears, her doubts, her exhaustion. And he listened, truly listened like no one ever had before. When she finally paused, he said softly, "You've spent so long being the one who saves everyone else. But who saves you?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Maybe you do," he smiled gently. "No, I just remind you that you can still save yourself." The room went quiet. The warmth between them wasn't loud or dramatic. It was peaceful, full of unspoken understanding. When she left that night, he walked her to her car again. As she turned to say goodbye, she hesitated, then leaned forward and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. Always. On her drive home, she realized something. She wasn't just healing from her past, she was rediscovering herself. The part of her that loved deeply, that cared fearlessly, that believed in the goodness of people. That part was alive again. In the days that followed, she made bold choices at work. She stood up for what she believed was right, even when it wasn't easy. Her confidence returned, not from power, but from peace. She often thought about what he said, that maybe healing wasn't about being saved, but about remembering your own strength. He had become the mirror that showed her who she really was. And every time she saw his daughter running toward her with open arms, she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Home. But deep inside, she also knew something was coming. Life had a way of testing people right when things started to feel right. And though she didn't know it yet, the next chapter would challenge everything she had rebuilt. But for now, in that moment, under the quiet glow of a streetlight and the warmth of newfound love, she allowed herself to simply feel happy. For the first time in years, that was enough. The days grew warmer as spring settled into the city. The trees outside her office were budding, and the air carried a fresh, hopeful scent. She noticed it everywhere, through the glass of her office window, in the laughter of strangers on the street, in the quiet moments when she made herself coffee in the morning. Life felt different now, though she still had her work and responsibilities. There was a softness that hadn't been there before, a lightness she couldn't ignore. Her thoughts often wandered to him and his daughter. Their little routines together, the quiet moments at the cafe and the laughter they shared had become a part of her life. She never expected it, but she had started to look forward to those moments more than anything else. They weren't dramatic or grand, they were ordinary, yet they carried extraordinary meaning. One Saturday morning, she decided to visit them unexpectedly. She knocked on their door with a small bouquet of flowers she picked up on the way. When he opened the door, surprise lit up his face, and his daughter peeked from behind him, curious. "Good morning," she said softly. He smiled. "You didn't have to bring anything." "I wanted to," she replied. "Just thought you might like these." The little girl gasped. "They're so pretty." "Thank you." She ran forward, hugging the bouquet gently. Inside, they sat around the small dining table, sipping coffee and sharing stories. His daughter talked about school, her friends, and the adventures she imagined in her drawings. The CEO listened, truly listened, letting herself enjoy the ordinary magic of it all. She realized that these simple moments, was what she had been missing in her life for so long. After breakfast, they decided to go to the park. The sunlight was soft and the breeze was warm. She watched the little girl run ahead laughing, while her father pushed a swing for her. She noticed the way he looked at her daughter, eyes full of love, patience, and pride. Something stirred in her chest. She realized that she had been holding back parts of herself, but here, with them, she could just be human. They walked along the path, talking quietly. At one point, the little girl asked her to push her on the swing. Hesitant at first, she joined in, laughing when the little girl squealed with delight. "You're really good at this," he said, watching them. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm learning," he nodded. "That's all we ever do, isn't it? Keep learning." The simplicity of his words struck her. Life didn't have to be complicated. Maybe it was the small things, the laughter of a child, a shared coffee, a quiet moment under the sun, that mattered most. Days later, back at work, she faced one of the most challenging decisions of her career. The board was pushing hard for a merger that could secure the company's future, but would also mean laying off several employees. She spent sleepless nights weighing options, feeling the familiar pressure of responsibility. Yet even in the midst of that stress, she felt a quiet presence inside her, a calm strength she hadn't known she possessed. It was him she thought of often during those nights. His patience, his kindness, the way he trusted life to unfold without forcing it. She realized she could apply the same wisdom to her decisions. She could lead with compassion, even in a world that demanded toughness. When she finally called a meeting to make her decision, she was clear and composed. She proposed a solution that balanced the company's needs with the employees' welfare. The board was hesitant at first, but her confidence, her conviction, and her careful reasoning won them over. After that day, she felt lighter than she had in years. She realized that hope wasn't just something he had reminded her of. It was something she had rebuilt within herself. She had learned that she didn't have to carry the world alone, but she also didn't have to let go of her own values to survive. That evening, she went to the cafe to celebrate quietly. She didn't expect to see them there, but when she walked in, she did. The little girl ran to her and hugged her tightly, laughing. He stood back, smiling warmly. "You made it," he said softly. "I did," she replied, smiling. "I had to share the good news." They sat together, sipping coffee, sharing the quiet joy of ordinary life. She realized then that her happiness wasn't about accolades or power. It was about connection, trust, and love. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew even stronger. They spent weekends exploring local markets, reading together at the park, and cooking simple meals at his home. The CEO began to see that her past loneliness had been filled with busyness, distractions, and walls she built to protect herself. Now those walls were gone, replaced by trust, laughter, and a willingness to feel deeply. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch of his home watching the sunset, the little girl rested her head on her father's shoulder. The CEO looked at them and felt an overwhelming sense of peace. She had never imagined that she could find something so ordinary yet so profound. He noticed her gaze. "You've changed," he said softly. She smiled. "I think I finally allowed myself to." He reached for her hand, holding it gently. "I'm glad you did. Because I can't imagine life without you now." Her chest tightened. She realized she felt the same way, though she had been afraid to admit it. "I feel the same," she whispered. For the first time, she allowed herself to accept love fully. Not the kind tied to power, achievement, or appearances, but the quiet, steady kind that grows in moments of care, laughter, and trust. Weeks passed, and life continued, but now every day felt richer. She laughed more freely, worked with renewed energy, and allowed herself to pause and enjoy the simple things. She started mentoring employees differently, listening to them with patience and helping them balance their lives with empathy. Her relationship with him and his daughter became the center of her world. Not in a dramatic or possessive way, but in a way that grounded her, reminded her of what truly mattered. She realized that the emptiness she had carried for years wasn't because life had failed her. It was because she had forgotten to allow herself to experience it fully. One evening, as they sat by the park, watching their shadows stretch long in the golden light, she turned to him. "You've changed my life," she said softly. He smiled. "No, you changed it yourself. I just reminded you of what was already there." She leaned on his shoulder, letting herself feel the depth of their connection. She realized that hope wasn't something someone could give. It was something you rediscovered, piece by piece, through kindness, trust, and love. That night, as she walked home, she felt a sense of completion. Not perfection. There would still be challenges, responsibilities, and tough days. But a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing she was not alone. That she could love, be loved, and find joy in the ordinary moments of life. Weeks later, at a small family gathering in his home, she watched him and his daughter dance around the living room, laughing. She joined them, spinning in time with their laughter, and for the first time in years she felt truly free. It wasn't a story of grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was quieter than that. It was a story of patience, trust, and the small ways life reminds us that we are alive.
She had learned that hope could be found in the eyes of someone who cared, in the laughter of a child,
in the quiet moments where love was shown without fanfare. And as she sat there, holding their hands, she realized she had found something even more important than happiness. She had found belonging, connection, and a reason to trust life again. For the first time in years, she didn't just survive, she truly lived.